Was his Bible? Oh, this is precious.
No. I think it says 1957.
1957. Okay.
Yeah. And then this was my mother's golf cart key.
With her name on it?
With her name.
Riley Keough thought she knew Graceland. She was wrong. For most of her life, Graceland had been a backdrop, a childhood landmark, a strange mix of playground and museum. She knew the tour routes, the famous rooms, the stories guides told so often they sounded like rehearsed lines in a play. But for the first time, she wasn't here as Elvis Presley's granddaughter, or Lisa Marie's daughter, or a guest walking politely through the past. She was here as the owner, the one person everyone was now looking to for answers. The day the estate lawyers handed her the final documents didn't feel triumphant. It felt heavy. Signatures on paper, meetings in quiet offices, headlines on every screen in the world. Everyone had an opinion about what Riley should do with Graceland. Sell it, expand it, protect it, modernize it, turn it into something bigger, brighter, louder. But standing inside the house, away from the noise, she wasn't thinking about the fans or the business. She was thinking about the people whose lives had exploded inside these walls long before she was born. A young man named Elvis, a teenage girl named Lisa, a woman named Priscilla who tried to hold all the broken pieces together. Graceland wasn't just a tourist attraction. It was the last physical place where their voices still echoed. People assume that being Elvis's granddaughter means you grow up with every door open, every secret explained. The truth is almost the opposite. There were rooms Riley never went in, closets she never saw opened, drawers that, even as a child, she was told were for staff, or for later, or just leave those alone. Some spaces were off limits out of respect. Others were off limits because nobody wanted to stir up the past. Now the rules had changed. When the paperwork cleared and the dust of the legal battle started to settle, Riley was given something more powerful than any document: the quiet, unspoken permission to go anywhere. A set of keys, codes, access. The kind of access that meant if she asked for a door to be opened, no one could tell her no. It sounds simple, but for her, it felt almost like betrayal. What right did she have to dig through the private life of a grandfather she never truly got to know? What right did she have to read words her mother might have written in anger or pain, thinking no one would ever see them? But at the same time, how could she be the guardian of this place and not understand what it was really guarding? That conflict is what led her away from the tour lights one quiet afternoon, down a hallway visitors never see, into a room that didn't appear on any brochure. It wasn't one of the famous spaces the public always asks about. It was simple, functional. The kind of room you use to put things you don't quite know what to do with. Old files, personal belongings, boxes that get labeled miscellaneous because no one has the heart to go through them. For years, staff had moved around these things carefully, respecting unspoken boundaries. No one wanted to be the person who found something they shouldn't. No one wanted to be the one who woke up old ghosts. But Riley was done walking past closed drawers. She started slowly, opening one file cabinet, then another. Inside were predictable things at first: estate documents, lists, inventories, old business correspondence. The stuff of a life turned into a brand. Useful, but not personal. Not what she was looking for. Her hands moved almost automatically, but her mind was racing. She remembered pieces of conversations with her mother, small comments about how not everything needs to be on display. or how there were parts of Elvis that the world would never understand. At the time, Riley had just heard those as vague statements. Now they sounded more like warnings. In the back of one drawer, something looked slightly off. A shelf that didn't sit quite right. A panel that didn't match the rest. It wasn't dramatic, but it was enough to catch her attention. She reached in and felt along the edges, her fingers trailing over cold metal and old wood until she found a lip. A little gap where there shouldn't be one. She tugged gently. The panel shifted. Behind it was a narrow space, just big enough for a small bundle of papers. They weren't thrown in carelessly. They were wrapped, deliberate, bound with a thin, faded ribbon that had lost its color years ago. Whoever put them there hadn't been hiding trash. They'd been hiding something that mattered. Riley hesitated. This wasn't like reading a file or a contract. This felt like stepping into a conversation she was never meant to hear. But the longer she held the bundle, the more it felt like it was meant for her. Not just as the owner of the estate, but as the daughter and granddaughter of the people whose lives were tied to these walls. She slid the ribbon loose. The top page crackled softly as she unfolded it. The handwriting hit her first. It wasn't Elvis's familiar looping script she'd seen on framed letters and memorabilia. It wasn't a tidy office hand from some manager or lawyer. It was messier, emotional. Letters pressed into the page a little too hard, like the writer had been holding the pen with more feeling than control. For a moment, Riley couldn't place it. Then certain shapes, certain ways of forming words, certain phrases jumped out at her because she'd seen them before. On birthday notes, on Post-its, on little scribbles left on kitchen counters so many years ago. It was her mother's handwriting. Long before Riley Keough was handed the keys to Graceland, Lisa Marie had stood somewhere in this house and written these pages by hand, then tucked them away where no one would find them. Until now. Riley didn't start reading right away. She just stared at the first page, frozen between two instincts. The daughter who wanted her mother back for one more conversation, and the granddaughter who knew anything written in this house could change how the world saw her family forever. Her mother had always been guarded when it came to Graceland. She could be funny, sharp, brutally honest about almost everything. Money problems, divorce, addiction, the crushing weight of the Presley name. But when it came to these walls, there was always a line she wouldn't cross. A pause, a subject change, a quiet, "Some things are just ours." Now Riley was holding a stack of just ours in her hands. The first letter wasn't even addressed to anyone. It started in the middle of a thought, like Lisa had grabbed paper in a storm of emotion and just started writing. "I grew up in a house that belonged to everyone but me," it said. Riley read the sentence 3 times. Lisa wrote about walking through Graceland as a child and hearing strangers tell stories about her own father as if they knew him better than she ever could. She wrote about feeling like she was visiting a museum of someone she lost, not living in a home where she belonged. Every holiday, every photo, every quiet moment carried the echo of a man the world had turned into a myth. She admitted something Riley had always suspected but never heard out loud. That sometimes she resented Elvis for dying and leaving her with a life she didn't choose. She loved him. That wasn't in question. The letter made that clear in 100 ways. But love doesn't erase anger. It didn't erase the feeling of being a daughter to a ghost and a trophy to the world at the same time. On one sheet, in careful writing, Lisa had copied a short note Elvis had once sent her, word for word, as if she was afraid the original would be lost. "I don't ever want this house to trap you," he'd written. "If it feels like a prison, I failed." Those lines hit like a punch. Graceland, the mansion people traveled across oceans to see, had always been seen as his castle. But here was Elvis, in his own words, worrying it might become a cage for the people he loved most. On another page, there were lines that sounded like a draft letter from Priscilla. It was never addressed, never signed, but it read like something she might have written in the aftermath of their divorce. It spoke about loving a man and losing him not to another woman, but to a machine made of fame, drugs, money, and expectations. It described Graceland as the place where she watched the man she married disappear into the legend the world worshipped. Every new page made the house feel less like a monument and more like a pressure cooker that had been sealed shut for decades. By the time Riley reached the bottom of the bundle, her chest felt tight. She thought she'd reached the end until she noticed one last envelope, slightly different from the rest. The paper was older, the color more yellowed. The handwriting on the front wasn't her mother's. It was addressed in a simple, almost hesitant script, "For Lisa, only if I don't make it back." Riley stared at the words, her heartbeat suddenly louder than the silence around her. Whatever was inside that envelope didn't just belong to Graceland. It belonged to the moment everything changed. Riley didn't open the envelope right away. Her thumb traced the edge of the paper, feeling the roughness of age, the way the fibers had stiffened over time. "For Lisa, only if I don't make it back." The words themselves were simple, but the implication was not. Whoever wrote this had expected danger. They had written it from the edge of something. Her first instinct was to believe it had to be her father, to imagine Elvis himself hunched over a table, writing to a little girl in case the worst happened. But the handwriting wasn't his. It wasn't Lisa's. It wasn't any hand she recognized from the usual family papers or business letters. So a new question appeared in her mind, sharp and unsettling. If it wasn't from Elvis, who feared he might not make it back to her, she could have torn it open on the spot. Instead, she set it gently aside like a live wire and went back through the other pages, looking for any clue that might explain it. Dates, locations, references, anything that would put this mysterious envelope into a context larger than her imagination. Nothing did. What she did find, buried in one of Lisa's later letters, was a memory written in passing. Just a single line, like a throwaway comment, but Riley felt it jump off the page. "There's still that box he never let anyone touch." No explanation, no description, just that sentence, as if Lisa assumed she'd always remember exactly what she meant. As if the box was so obvious, it needed no further detail. Riley didn't remember it at all. The idea that somewhere in Graceland there was an object her grandfather had guarded that fiercely, and her mother had worried about enough to mention years later, made the back of her neck prickle. She picked up the envelope again. If this was connected to that box, then maybe opening it without understanding the bigger picture would be a mistake. Maybe the letter was the last piece of a puzzle, not the first. For the first time since she stepped into that room, Riley felt pulled somewhere else, not by curiosity alone, but by an odd sense of responsibility. If there was a box he never let anyone touch, she needed to find it before she decided what to do with this envelope. The house staff had spoken in fragments over the years, small comments about old trunks, storage rooms, things from the last tours that nobody wanted to disturb. There were parts of Graceland that weren't glamorous enough for visitor brochures, but were loaded with history all the same. It didn't take long to find the room everyone avoided unless they had to. Old stage pieces, travel cases, garment bags, boxes labeled in fading marker. The overflow of a life lived on the road and then frozen in place. As Riley moved through it, she wasn't looking for Elvis, the icon. She was looking for something that matched Lisa's sentence, a box that felt different. She found it almost by accident. It was smaller than she expected. Not a trunk, not a chest, just a sturdy, plain box with a lock that looked older than she was. No label, no tape, no inventory tag. It could have been anything or nothing at all. But the lock told another story. People don't put locks on things that don't matter. For a long moment, she just stared at it, feeling the same hesitation she'd felt with the envelope. Then she did what, for decades, no one in this house had done without permission. She asked for the key. When the lock finally turned and the lid gave way, Riley didn't find glitter or gossip. She found paper, folders, thin stacks of contracts that showed just how much of Elvis's life had been signed away. Handwritten pages where he'd done rough math on tour schedules, and money he didn't seem to fully control. And tucked underneath, smaller than everything else, was a reel of tape with a date written on the label, frighteningly close to the end. A private recording, no notes, no explanation. Riley held it in her hands and knew one thing with absolute certainty. Whatever was on that tape was never meant for the world. And now, somehow, it was meant for her. Riley sat in silence, the reel of tape still in her hand. For hours she'd been turning it over, too afraid to play it, too afraid not to. Everything she'd found, the letters, the contracts, the unspoken truths, had already redrawn her family's history. But this tape felt like something else. It wasn't written, polished, or edited. Whatever was inside it was real-time Elvis, unfiltered, unguarded, and private. When she finally played it, there was no music, no rehearsed message, just a man's quiet breathing, and then Elvis's voice, weary but clear. He talked about exhaustion, about the endless shows, about not knowing where the man ended and the image began. He wondered aloud if his daughter would remember the man at all, or only the myth the world had made out of him. He said he wanted Graceland to be her shelter, not her burden. Then suddenly, his tone changed. He spoke about papers he'd been preparing, plans to reshape his estate, to protect his family from what he called the machine. He didn't name names, but the fear in his voice was unmistakable. He said he was leaving instructions, but that time was running thin. His words faded, broken by static, ending mid-sentence. If anything happens to me here at Graceland. Then silence. Riley sat frozen. It wasn't just a missing ending. It was an unfinished goodbye. And now she held the proof that her grandfather had seen the storm coming before anyone else did. Days later, she made a choice that only she could make. Some of what she'd found, she shared, small excerpts, fragments that showed Elvis as human, loving, fragile. Enough to remind the world he was more than the jumpsuits and the headlines. But other things, she locked away again. The letter addressed to Lisa, the full tape, the pieces too personal, too sacred, too heavy to turn into public fascination. She knew what fans wanted, the mystery, the drama, the secrets. But she also knew what her family needed, peace. So Riley became both guardian and storyteller, opening just enough doors to honor the truth without letting the ghosts escape entirely. Now, when people walk through Graceland, they still see the glitter and the gold. But somewhere in its quietest room, a granddaughter knows the deeper story. One written not in fame, but in love, loss, and unfinished words. If you were moved by what Riley uncovered, there's more hidden within Graceland's walls. More stories, more truths, more echoes waiting to be heard. Subscribe and turn on notifications because the next discovery might not just change how you see Elvis. It might change how you feel about him.